We are watching shares of Apple trading. It's just a little lower, down about 0.5% here on the back of their earnings results. The company posting a third straight quarter of declines in terms of revenues. Earnings coming in at $1.26. Estimate was $1.21 a share. Revenue beating expectations, coming in at $81.8 billion. Versus the estimate of $81.56 billion. Let's try to break down some of the categories for the company. iPhone, certainly a big one that investors are watching. That revenue was a miss, coming in at $39.67 billion. The expectation was $39.79. Services beating here, their revenue at $21.21 billion versus the $20.7 billion that was expected. We are also seeing iPad revenue a miss. And then the wearable space, that was a beat there at $8.28 billion versus $8.38 billion that was expected. One of the markets we like to watch very closely, Greater China, that revenue coming in much stronger than expected at $15.7 billion there. Joining us now is Bob O'Donnell, Technalysis Research President and Chief Analyst, and Ray Wang, Constellation Research Principal Analyst Founder. Good to have both of you on. Bob, let's start with you because, you look at iPhone revenue being there a miss, but this is something that every smartphone company out there has had to struggle with in terms of declining demand. What do you make of the numbers coming out from Apple?
You know what? Actually, they're not bad. I mean, all things considered, there was a big expectation that the numbers would drop a fair bit this quarter because, as you pointed out, there's a huge drop in smartphone shipments across the Android ecosystem. Qualcomm had a bit of they did reasonably well. They made guidance, but it was still lower. And they power a lot of the Android ecosystem. Of course, they still supply modems to Apple as well. But, I think all things considered, as you pointed out there at the end, Akiko, the China numbers are better than people expected. And of course, once again, it's services that kicks in and really makes up the difference for Apple. And that's what I think a lot of people were hoping for. As long as those iPhone numbers were close, and clearly they were off, but not terribly, you knew the services could kick in and fill in the rest.
Ray, let me pick up on that point that Bob just made there in terms of, this not being as bad. Obviously, a lot riding on what's about to come for Apple with that September event and the iPhone 15. How do you look at the numbers today in the context of what is traditionally a weaker quarter for the company?
Bob's absolutely right. This is much better than expected. But the most important thing really is the active number of users, active devices that they have. This is all about how much money they can make per device. It's not about total iPhone sales. And what they were able to show is that services are continuing to grow and the non-iPhone sales around wearables is also picking up. Those two are complementary. And when you think about what the average spend per user is, that number has continually gone up over the last 24 quarters. And that's really because of their ability to actually expand iPhone and expand services growth. Those two things have actually made up to be the better part of the story. And by the time we get to a September event, right, those sales will then hit into the next cycle and to the next year. So that's actually a good news for a lot of investors. But more importantly, it's good to see that on the high end, we're still seeing growth. China has recovered. And of course, we've yet to see what happens with the India numbers. I'm not sure the breakouts were in there. So.
Yeah, I didn't see the breakout so far in there, Ray. And I want to pose this question to you because, for instance, on their last earnings call, Tim talked about that a lot, about the opportunity in India. What are you looking to hear on the call when it comes to the India market?
Yeah, I'm hoping someone asks the question about, hey, have they seen gains in India now that they put 3 flagship retail store operations in there? There's plans to do manufacturing in India, and I think that's going to be a long-term winner for Apple over the next 3 to 4 quarters. That's something people are going to watch for those volumes. And then, of course, thinking about what else is coming out of India in terms of the services growth that will be the attach rate to what's actually happening with the devices.
Bob, let's pick up on that point about India, because I feel like we've been talking about the potential of India for many, many years now.
Yes.
It does certainly feel like Apple has been planting their roots. They're starting to see some of that take shape. But how do you think investors should be looking at that market where it is right now in the context of China and some of the headwinds that a lot of companies like Apple are facing there?
Well, I mean, look, it is going to be incredibly important. I think there's going to be a couple of unique challenges to India. First of all, of course, we haven't seen as many premium phones in general sell there. It's much been more on the lower end. Now, Apple does have a bunch of lower cost, older versions of iPhone products. And to Ray's point, it's once you get an iPhone, then you get attached to services. Now, the other concern, though, with India is I think we're going to see some slower attached to services there because it's very much more of a hardware-focused market. Obviously, they use services, but I don't think to the degree that we've seen in some of the other markets. So I think India is going to be interesting. I think it will be different than China. I don't think we can think of it the same way. I think you'll see a little bit lower ASP in terms of the phones that are being purchased there. I think you'll see a little bit of lower attach, but it's still a huge opportunity. And they have almost no installed base in India. It's extraordinarily small. So the great thing is it's almost nothing but upside for them there.
And Bob, I want to ask you in terms of both the iPhone 15 and say the newest Apple Watch, is that enough to be supportive of Apple's continued strength?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, it's going to be, we're going to see upgrades. It's not going to be probably radical, more than likely, right? Until Apple does, say, a foldable along the lines of a Samsung or what have you, which I think eventually they'll do, maybe a foldable iPad first, but eventually I think we'll get there. It tends to be incremental upgrades. I think you'll see that again this year, but it's enough. Remember now, we're not in that phase anymore of everybody upgrading every year. It's every couple of years. So most people are going to be upgrading from, say, an iPhone 12 or maybe a 13 or even maybe an 11, right? And so when you make the comparisons between the 11 or 12 versus the 15, they are big. And so that's the important thing to bear in mind in a very mature smartphone market, especially here in the US and a lot of parts of the world where people, are big iPhone fans. That's how they think about it. So with that in mind, I think they'll do just fine. They'll have enough things there to keep it interesting, and that will continue to drive the market forward.
Yeah, Ray, we got those reports a few weeks ago about Apple potentially sort of keeping the shipments with the iPhone 15 pretty steady to where it was a year ago. 85 million units is what Bloomberg reported. Does Apple have to raise the price on especially the Pro level to keep this revenue and this cycle going when you consider, to Bob's point, sort of the broader length of an upgrade cycle? What are we talking about now, 4 years?
Bob's right. We've stretched out the replacement cycle, but we're in a super wave of replacements, right? There's something about 200 million units that could potentially replace. 85 million is a good number for what's going to happen on the high end, but of course there's stuff in between. And yes, most people are switching out phones every 2 to 3 years. The services plans are 2 to 3 years when you look at the big carriers in North America, and the same thing that's happening in other markets. So I think that's important. But along the way, right, we're seeing gross margin also go up, right? It's 0.3% versus what was estimated, but I think it's a very important piece. And so you're going to see not only just the additions of an iPhone 15, which actually helps with the launch, you're going to see additions in terms of updates to the Mac family and the iPad family. You saw there was a 20% year-over-year decrease on the iPad. There's going to be new products along the way that will fill in the gap. And, the surprise is the wearables. No one expected the wearables to continue to do this well. Remember when Apple said they were going to announce a watch, everybody was like, is that going to make a big difference? And it has. And you can see that as they've diversified, even though the iPhone is still about 50% of their revenue.
And Ray, I want to ask you, so services revenue was a beat, right? What does Apple need to be doing more to incorporate? What are you looking to hear when it comes to generative AI, considering they were a little late to the party in that respect?
Well, here's the interesting thing. On one hand, they're a little bit late to the party for marketing AI, but on the other hand, they've been incorporating AI in all their devices for quite some time. They've got AI in chips, which they've been talking about for years. They are able to suggest things, right? Siri's been around for quite some time. So they're not ahead on AI. They're not behind on AI, as people are saying. They're actually ahead on AI because they don't talk about AI saying, hey, here's the shiny object on AI. They say, here's the benefit of what AI can do for you. And I think that's the difference and the nuance you should be listening to, or we should be listening to on the earnings call, to be able to understand how far along the AI spectrum they are and where is it benefiting users and where it's benefiting them in terms of their network.
Yeah, Ray, I feel like you just tapped into your inner Tim Cook in the framing of that AI discussion. But Bob, the last time we talked about this, you highlighted this when the company unveiled its headsets, the Vision Pro. You said this is great. There could be mass adoption, but where is the AI play in all of this? How do we look at that? The Vision Pro, where the future is, obviously it's not a big revenue driver immediately, but if they don't have that key AI component, what does that look like?
Well, a couple of things. So on Vision Pro, look, they've already pulled back. Even initial estimates, some people were saying 1 million. Now it's down to 400,000. I mean, it's going to take a long time for that category. I think it still has a long way to go to really be the AR sort of product that people want. But I'll say a couple of things. So Apple as Ray said, Apple has been using AI, but they've been using sort of more traditional AI, machine learning, things like that. What they have been missing is the new generational AI, generative AI stuff. And that's missing. And yes, Siri's been there, but look, we all made jokes about Siri because it never really worked well. Mind you, nor did Alexa, nor did Google Assistant. And you're seeing both those companies, Google and Amazon, saying, we're going to put a foundation model underneath these assistants, and they're finally going to be able to do what we want them to do. I think you'll see the same thing happen with Siri. But Apple, again, is going to take the Apple approach. They're going to frame it just very nicely. Like you said, I think Ray did a good job of providing the perspective that Tim will probably say. But when they're ready, they will launch with full force about, generational AI-based stuff. And I think you'll see it in Siri. You'll see it in other places. Right now, they'll probably talk about filtering on the camera and other things that we've seen other companies talk about. But eventually, you're going to see some of those services. And I think Apple will find clever ways to integrate it. They're always going to be there. They're going to wait till they feel like they've got a unique angle to it, and then they'll pounce. And I think we'll see that sometime in 24.
Bob O'Donnell and Ray Wang, great to get both of your perspectives on the back of these numbers. Appreciate the time.